Trace Vector, a unique spectacle of light and sound that captures the mystery, whimsy, and charm of a loved, forgotten era of classic gaming. Whereas many indie retro throwbacks rely on the beautiful tried and true pixel aesthetic of the days of old, like the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo Entertainment System, Trace Vector went for the forgotten form of vector-based graphics. Through that minimalistic challenge and facing some of the limitations that vector graphics have, can something that was popularized as early back as the late 70s and early 80s capture the public eye of the modern 2014 audience? Let's jump to Warp and find out. The game is the debut title by Vixel Games, an army of two developers, Alexander Hill and Tyler Polstra. The concept began with the two developers working on a much more ambitious project. Unfortunately, the larger project faced the all-too-common problem of being too big for two people to handle. One part of the project that they enjoyed quite a bit was a minigame where you have to hack into a door tracing different lines. They realized that the minigame had a lot of promise to it and decided to expand on the idea. It was also partially inspired by Alexander Hill having a fascination with amateur astronomy. He would spend a lot of time looking up at the stars and admiring the different constellations. The game itself, as you might guess, is a love letter to late 70s and early 80s arcade, and the game would feel right at home with games like Tempest, Asteroids, and Robotron 2084. Not just the art style, except for Robotron, but in gameplay philosophy. Easy to learn, difficult to master, and very much reliant on your reflexes. The level begins with a series of white vector lines forming together to make a path from left to right. Your ship, being represented by a color vector line, moves automatically, and you control if it goes up or down with the arrow keys. Then when you hit the branching path, the way you tell it to is the way it'll go. You have to navigate through the maze-like trails so that your line gets from the start to the finish without either colliding with your same line through a loop or ending up in a red dead circle. Should that happen, you'll be sent back to the start and lose a bit of fuel as a penalty. If you do run out of gas and then hit a dead end or your previous line, then it's game over and you'll have to start back from the beginning of the stage. Scattered throughout the levels are fuel cells that are a bit trickier to get, but they can help you gain fuel when you reach the end of the level. If you're having trouble timing the more tricky situations, one of the lifesavers is the ability to slow down your ship. Everything goes bullet time so you can make more precise moves, but if you use it for too long, it'll eat away precious fuel. My advice if you're gonna play this, do not be afraid to use it. The game requires some really split-second timing, so unless you're Steve Wiebe, it might be a good idea to let go of your pride and use some of that bullet time goodness. This is actually a big part of what works so well about the design of the game. You're making split-second decisions, yes, but there is a big risk versus reward factors of the game. After screwing up in the same section 6 or 7 times, is it really worth it to go after these fuel cells, or go after the more safer route to be able to conserve what fuel you have? The game looks and sounds a bit intimidating at first, but the early levels do a great job of guiding you through the mechanics with minimal tutorials. After repeated playthroughs, you'll find yourself completing perfect runs and marveling at your own cat-like reflexes. Completionists may have a few troubles with the game's structure, however. You see, each of the stages is broken up into 6 levels. You can't play the individual levels in each stage without going through the previous levels in that stage already. Given how quickly you move through some of the levels, you don't always have a lot of time to be able to plan a strategy. I understand why the team did this to keep with the arcade-style difficulty that the game is going for, but completionists may have to go through the levels 1 or 2 times before getting their perfect runs on the individual levels. And thankfully you can either restart an individual level if you screwed up at the cost of some fuel, and you don't have to get a perfect run on the levels beforehand if you just want to get a perfect run on the level you're trying to get at. The main criticism I have of Trace Vector is that the difficulty curve feels a bit unbalanced. There are some levels in the middle of the game that took me 8 or 9 tries to finally get through it, but later on I got through some of the later stages and I got through them once on my first try. The at times keyboard-chuckingly frustrating difficulty of the game will probably alienate a lot of people wanting to play it. But like any difficult game, the only way it can work is that if it feels like your fault and not the game's fault. And that's one thing the game gets right, is the controls work very well, while minimal, are very responsive to your actions. And it's all designed with the slowdown mechanic in mind, so again, don't be afraid to use it. The developers know full well how hard their game is and even mock you if you screw up, which is a really nice touch. The all-important feeling of satisfaction that you've outsmugged the game and outsmarted the game is certainly there, but watch your mouth, kid, or you'll find yourself floating home. Let's talk about vector-based graphics for a moment. While not to get too technical, vector-based graphics are remembered very fondly because it didn't require a graphics processor and the screen did all the graphics work. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, when other games were very much pixel-based, vector graphics not requiring as much power created a beautifully crisp and sharp image. Even today, if you find a good working machine of Star Wars 1983 or Tempest, it looks like it's in high definition. Trace Vector very much lives up to that high quality standard. Through the clever use of the minimalist style, the game is a pure spectacle with just the right choice of color palettes. It's kind of an 80s style hyper neon look where all the different colors and lines really pop at you. It's always fun to see the level construction as it's connecting dots. It's the same kind of sensation as seeing dominoes topple ahead, revealing the hazards you'll have in store. It gives you a moment to plan out exactly what you want to do in the level and leaves you in eager anticipation to start your journey. The hyper-techno aesthetic is obviously nothing new, being featured in games like Geometry Wars or Rez for the PlayStation 2. Trace Vector, in comparison to those games, have very simple effects and brightness to it that lets you concentrate on what's happening without any distractions. It's a very humble and confident art style as it finds just the right balance for the player. Not to say that the game doesn't show off in a few places. The warp sequence, where we get to see your ship rotate and then go into hyperdrive, the game over text, where it minimalizes to a small dot on the screen. I hope you're all getting the idea that Star Wars is kind of a big thing in this game. And perhaps my favorite effect when your ship explodes into bursting lines. A really nice bonus to the visuals can be found in the options menu. Here you can toggle CRT mode that brings this really neat screen effect to everything, and you can even adjust how brightly the lines glow and the vector thickness. They're really nice touches where you can emulate just how those classic screens looked back in the day. But one thing about the game that I suspect a lot of these 80s arcades can't emulate leads me to one of the best discoveries for gaming that Trace Vector brings to the table. The pumping electronica music throughout the game is one of the first truly great soundtracks of the year. It's the first game project by artist Michael Birch, who goes under the name Flexstyle. Before Trace Vector, he produced both original music and remixes through OC Remix, including games like Mega Man, Final Fantasy, and Dark Cloud 2. It's always nice to see some love for Dark Cloud 2. Each of the tracks in Trace Vector represents one of the stages in the game, and a great feature of the music is that after you beat a level, the music builds up more and more between the levels, like the percussion being added to give the music more body as it progresses. It's such a great touch to keep the excitement on the stage going and establishes a real progression for the player. There have been a couple games that have used this technique, like Bit Trip Runner, but it's done really well here and adds to the cool factor of the game. It's a very energized soundtrack that's clearly in love with the electronica that defined the 80s and wouldn't be out of place in the original Tron film. It has a lot of different variety in terms of the different instruments that it uses to the different tones that you'll hear throughout the game. It's definitely one of those soundtracks you'll want to keep in your car and blast the speakers with it as you're driving. The sound design in the game is also a big highlight. It was done by Mr. Hill and really adds a lot to the tone and the flow that the game provides. The bleeps and bloops are all here and all very satisfying. A really nice touch to Endless Mode is the voice sampling featuring Alexander's voice. I always love it when modern retro throwbacks do it, and Trace Vector is no exception. In terms of the mileage I got from the game, it took me about 6 hours to complete it all the way through, not including getting perfect runs with the fuel cells. After you complete the adventure mode, an expert mode unlocks, just in case you want your ego ground up into tiny bite-sized pieces. The game also provides an endless mode and high scores for all the different levels. As of right now, you can pick up Trace Vector for the PC on Desura for $9.99. The Mac and Linux versions of the game are nearing completion and will be launched shortly. The team is considering porting the game to other platforms like home consoles or mobile, but they want to finish the computer version first. The game also has a greenlight page, so if you like to see its way on Steam, you know what to do. Flexstyle's amazing soundtrack to the game is available on Bandcamp and also available for purchase, but as an added bit of funness, they're making an arcade stand-up port using actual vector graphics. The footage so far looks great, and it'll be neat to see what the game can do once it's fully completed. Trace Vector is not a perfect game. Its high degree of difficulty is a great callback to the 1980s arcade, but I can see people being intimidated or frustrated by its at times unforgiving nature. But the game is completely fair with its difficulty, and if you're up for the challenge, the reflex-heavy gameplay is a rewarding and satisfying experience. The game is a unique take on the Endless Runner genre, a wonderful spectacle of light and sound, and a love letter to an almost forgotten niche of classic arcade nirvana. I was very close to completely overlooking this game, but Trace Vector is a shining gem and hopefully a glimpse of the awesome things to come this year in indie gaming. Punch it! You can find the information on where to find the game in the description below. Thanks for taking the time to watch my little video today. A huge thanks to Joe Redifer, who provided some of the motion graphics for this episode. He's part of a cool show called GameSack. You can find it right here. And if you liked what I did here, feel free to look at my previous review on Mark of the Ninja. Thanks again for watching. Have a good day.